I'm Mike Ozanian, and this is Sports Money. Over 20 million Americans play fantasy sports each year, and revenues from the operation of fantasy sports leagues are estimated to be over $1 billion annually. But a lawsuit filed by an obscure resident of Colorado claims fantasy sports leagues are illegal. Here to tell us what this case could mean for fantasy sports leagues and the professional sports they follow is Matthew Pace of the New York City law firm Duval and Stackenfeld. Matthew, thanks for joining us today on Sports Money. What is the essence of this lawsuit, Matthew?
Well, the essence of this lawsuit is that the plaintiff is a Colorado resident who has chosen to sue Viacom, CBS Sportsline, ESPN, the Sporting News. And the essence of the suit is that this is illegal gambling under the New Jersey state laws. And trying to declare that this is illegal gambling, that this is a game of chance, not a game of skill, and illegal.
Now, this guy, he lives in Colorado, but he's filed a lawsuit in New Jersey. Does he have standing? Does he have grounds to file this lawsuit?
It's interesting. He has chosen a very obscure statute under the New Jersey law, which allows for a plaintiff basically to serve as a private attorney general and try to sue a bookie for illegal gambling activity. He's claiming that ESPN and all these people that run fantasy game sports here are bookies, and he is suing basically the interests of the state to collect basically half of the gambling awards or half of the gambling stake here, which is a significant amount of money.
It's big money, of course. If you participate in fantasy sports, you have to pay a fee, sometimes a pretty hefty fee. And if your players that you've chosen, which are members of the professional sports league, if they perform really well, you can win, and you can win a lot of money.
Correct.
I mean, to me, that seems like gambling. I don't know the law or the technicalities of it. The commissioner of the NFL, Paul Tagliabue, in an interview has said he doesn't consider fantasy sports gambling. Is it gambling?
You've asked a lot of complicated questions there. I think the basic notion on what's gambling and what's not gambling is that wagering on games of chance are gambling. Wagering on games of skill are not considered illegal gambling. I tend to agree that most of the people that participate, if not all of the people that participate in fantasy sports, do it with a modicum of skill. They have to choose the right players. They have to choose the right players on the right teams. They have to choose a lot of things. A lot of skill goes in, a lot of preparation goes into.
Yeah, and you even see magazines come out and they're ranking fantasy
Correct.
sports players. It's almost like when you go to the track and you get the paper there and it's telling you the odds and how the horses have done, sort of the same type of notion there.
It has that kind of publicity around it, and generally the rule is that if you're wagering on a game of skill, in most states, that's a legal wager.
Now, CDM Fantasy Sports is involved in a lawsuit with Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball wants people to pay for using statistics that come from Major League Baseball, batting averages, win-losses by pitchers, all that kind of stuff. Is there a link between these two, a commonality?
I think there's a commonality in that they both involve fantasy sports. The Humphrey suit tries to declare that fantasy sports or wagering on fantasy sports is illegal. CDM does not address that issue. Rather, what they address is the issue that you say, is that basically anybody who runs or operates a fantasy sports game is using the intellectual property, as Major League Baseball would see it, of the league that they're running a fantasy sports league for. Generally, by using the stats, using the names of the players, they think that there's a personal right of privacy, a personal right of publicity that is being violated here.
What are the ramifications, possible ramifications, depending on who wins this particular case? Because it seems to me that fantasy leagues also spur interest in following this, in watching it. So this could move on to TV advertising,
right,
ratings, all types of things. What do you see here?
That's the exact actual argument that CDM has made in this case, is that really they're contributing to the brand of Major League Baseball by running these fantasy sports. They're contributing to the brand of the individual players. That's one of the arguments they've made. The ramifications of the CDM case are, I believe, that if they determine that the court determines that CDM requires a license from Major League Baseball in order to publish stats and use players' names, it's going to become much more expensive for fantasy sports operators to run their leagues. As a result, fantasy sports operators are either going to pass this cost along to consumers because they're certainly not going to absorb it themselves, or they're just going to get out of the business. So what's going to do, it's going to shrink the number of participants or people that can run fantasy sports games, and as a result, raise the cost of participation for the consumers. On the other hand, the Humphrey suit, if the Humphrey suit is determined that it is illegal, that wagering on fantasy sports is illegal, which I think is unlikely, but if that is the case, I don't necessarily think that will destroy fantasy sports. I think what it'll do is it'll change the revenue model for the people participating or for the organizers of fantasy sports game from more of an advertising revenue rather than a quote-unquote subscription or gambling revenue.
Now, for the sports money on-the-spot question, who is going to win the Humphrey suit?
In my opinion, I think the Humphrey suit actually will not come to its merits. I think that the court will determine that since none of the defendants, ESPN, none of them really have a place of business in New Jersey. The plaintiff is a resident, as you pointed out, a resident of the state of Colorado. I believe that they're going to sort of reject his forum shopping and not allow the case to go in New Jersey. However, if the case did go to its merits, which I don't think will happen, I do believe that it would be determined, like House Resolution 4411 just determined, that fantasy sports is a game of skill, not a game of chance, and will not be subject to the illegal wagering.
Well, that's what the guys who play fantasy sports would say. Matthew, thank you for joining us on Sports Money.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
A big thank you to sports attorney Matthew Pace for joining us today on Sports Money, the program that looks into the business of sports. I'm Mike Ozanian. Thanks for watching, and remember, life is the 6 inches in front of your face.